Hello everyone, my name is Oman, and in this video we will be learning how to implement a local SQLite database in your React Native or Expo app. The reason why I'm making this video is that I noticed that a lot of tutorial videos on YouTube and other educational resources are quite old, and when I was learning how to implement a SQLite database for the first time, the code did not work for me. The reason for that is that when Expo released one of their newer versions, they completely changed the way Expo SQLite works. If you go and try to make a SQLite database using those old videos and the old resources, you'll find that your code won't work on the most recent Expo versions, which means that you have two choices. Either roll back the Expo version, or you have to rewrite your code according to the most recent Expo SQLite documentation. For the sake of this tutorial, I will be making a simple form where the user can fill out their information, and then we will take this information and store it in our SQLite database. I will break down this video into multiple sections so you can easily find the information that you need in case you need to rewatch this and not waste your time. First, let's create a new Expo project. Open your terminal and run npx create expo app at latest. And you can also pass in an argument template if you'd like to choose from one of the templates. In this tutorial, we're going to be using JavaScript, so I'm going to start with a blank template. Now that we have created our project, let's go ahead and install the SQLite package. This will be our database engine. A SQLite database is a file-based database that stores data directly on your device. It does not need a server, which means it works offline, and it uses SQL language to manage data. It stores data in tables like a spreadsheet. Now let's get to coding. First, we're going to start with our App.js file. Let us set up our database. In order to set up our database, we will be using the SQLite provider component. This component provides a SQLite database to all children. All descendants of this component will be able to access this database using the SQLite context hook. We need this component in order to ensure that all the components are using the same database. This component also manages database connections properly and provides database to all the components via context. Let us start with importing the SQLite provider from the Expo SQLite package that we installed earlier. Now let's use the SQLite provider in order to set up our database. Since we will be storing user data in our database, let's name it userdatabase.db. On init is a custom initialization handler that runs before rendering the children, and we will be using it to create the users table in our database. Note that this line of code will let multiple people use the database at once safely. We will also set the Use New Connection option to false. This will keep one stable connection and help us avoid random crashes. Congratulations! We have successfully set up our SQLite provider in our App.js. Our next step will be creating a component that will collect the user's data. Let's call it UserForm.js. In our UserForm.js file, let us start with the imports. First, we're going to import the useState React hook for managing the form state. Then, we will import the view, text input, and button core React Native components for building our UI. We will also import the alert component for showing our success and error pop-ups. And lastly, we will use the Use SQLite context hook to access the database connection. Now in our code, let us start by creating a form object state to track our user's input. Essentially, this object state acts as 4 empty boxes that are waiting to be filled by our user's input. Then I'm gonna get the database connection from the SQLite provider. This is our ticket to interact with the SQLite database. And now we can write a function that will handle the user's input and process the information. First, I'm going to write the validation logic to make sure that the user inputs all the data that is required. All it does is it checks if any fields are empty, which is more than enough for the demonstration purposes, but if you're writing it for your own purposes, then I advise you to write a more complex mechanism for validation. After we've made sure that our user inputs all the required data, we can go ahead and start inserting the data into our users table. Note that the question mark placeholders in our query acts as a security measure as it prevents a SQL injection, and the value array below fills the placeholders in order. After a successful insertion, we will send an alert to notify that the user has been added successfully, and we will also reset the form. And lastly, we will have an error handler that will catch and display any of the database errors. Now that we're done with handling the input, we can go ahead and start writing our UI components. This is a simple UI containing 4 text input fields and a submit button. And last but not least, we will be adding a little bit of styling to our form. Oh, and don't forget to export the component so that we can use it in our App.js file. Let's take a look at what we've got so far. Let us go back to our App.js file. In App.js, first make sure that you have imported the UserForm component and then add it to the code. And make sure that there is no comma at the end of phone text not null, otherwise you'll get an error. Now we can open our console and take a look at what we've got so far. You may run this app on your emulator if you like, but me personally, I like to use the Expo Go, so that's what I will be using. Here's what it looks like on my Expo Go app on my mobile device. You can also play around with the styles in any way that you see fit. Now, you may have noticed that I did not input any information yet. That is because we don't have a component to display our data. So let's create a component that will show our saved users. We'll call this component UserList.js. Just like with our user form, let us start with the imports section of this code. First, we will import the useEffect and useState React hooks for managing side effects and component state. Next, we will import the Flatlist component for rendering our scrollable lists, text and view as standard components, and also the activity indicator that shows a loading spinner. And lastly, as always, we have to import the useSQLite context hook to access the SQLite database connection. Next, we will go ahead and set up our state. We'll set up our users, which will store the list of users. Initially, it's going to be an empty array. Next, we will set state for is it loading, which will track the loading status, and we will start it as true. And finally, we will get the database connection from useSQLite context. Let's handle fetching our data. We will be using async to handle the asynchronous operations. The new Expo SQLite uses asynchronous methods for their operations, which is why we will be using db.getAllAsync to execute the SQL query and return all the results. After we fetch the results from our database, we will set it in our state. And finally, we will turn off our loading state by setting it to false. Next up is useEffect hook, which will run when the component mounts because we have not given it any parameters. And inside the useEffect hook, we will trigger the initial data loading. Essentially, this means that when the screen first appears, it will load the users. Now, in order to not show an empty list during our initial load, we want to write an if statement that displays a loading spinner when the data is being fetched. Finally, let us render the flat list on the screen. You can also add a style sheet and style this component as you like. Finally, I'm going to export this user list and add it to my App.js file. After all the components have been made and added, we can go ahead and test our application to see if it works. I've entered Expo Go and I am about to connect to our app. Our app has loaded and our database is empty. As you can see, it shows no users found to indicate that our database is empty. Let's go ahead and write a John Doe and see if it works in our database. Success! The user has been added successfully, but it is not showing up immediately in our database. For that, we have to refresh the app. And boom, as you can see, the user has indeed been added into our database and it shows up. Let's try again with another person. Another success. Let's refresh the app, and there we go. The user is indeed in our database. Now, the reason why they're not showing up immediately is because we're not refreshing our list. At the moment, the only way to refresh the list is by restarting the application, so our UserList.js file will fetch the data from the database. If we want our user list to refresh without restarting the app, then we'll have to make some changes to the code. But don't worry, it is a very simple change. The first thing that we're going to do when we go back to UserList.js is import refresh control, which will allow us to write a simple refresh mechanism in our app. Next, I'm simply going to change the initial value of isLoading to false. And then in our loadUsers function, we're going to set the isLoading to true. Also, we will be making a slight change to our select statement, and we will be ordering our data by ID in descending order. This way, the newly added entries will be appearing on top. And finally, all we have to do is to add refresh control to our Flatlist. And on refresh, this code will run the loadUsers function, which will load our new users into the list. Let's go ahead and test what we've got so far. Alright, we're back in our app with our two users showing in the list. Let's add another user. Once I've added the new user, all I'm gonna do is pull up to refresh, and voila, the user appears on the screen without having to reload the entire app. And we're finally done. I really hope that this video helped you in any way or form. If you have any questions or suggestions, please leave a comment down below, and I will do my best to answer it. I will be uploading this code to GitHub in case you want to look at it by yourself. I highly encourage you to take a look at the Expo SQLite documentation in order to find more information that you may find useful for your application. I've left the links to the GitHub repo and also the Expo SQLite documentation in the description. Thank you so much for watching this video. Leave a like if you liked it, or don't if you didn't. Subscribe and stay tuned for more videos, and you can also reach out to me in case you have any suggestions or you need me to make any more tutorials for you. Bye bye!